Welcome to Programming Knowledge. So in this tutorial we will start with the basics of Dart. Dart is the official programming language that the Flutter framework uses. I will be using Dartpad to write all my Dart's code. So every Dart program's basic requirement is a main method. Main method is the entry point of every Dart program. We can write the main method like this: main followed by a set of parentheses, then curly braces, and over here we write our code. We can also add a void over here if needed. Void basically specifies that a method or function will not return anything. We will study about functions in details later in this tutorial. So after main method, let us discuss about print. So to print anything on the console, we use the keyword print and then the parentheses, then single quotes, and then we can write the sentence that we want to be printed on the console. So for this case I am writing programming knowledge and then followed by a semicolon. Now if I run this program in my console, I would be able to see programming knowledge. So you can see programming knowledge is visible in my console. Now if I change the text over here, the output in the console will also change. Suppose I write my own name and then click on run. So now the console is showing my name. Like Python, we can also use double quotes and triple quotes to print blocks of statements. After print, let's discuss about data types. So there are 5 to 6 primitive data types, namely int for storing integer values, float and double for storing decimal values, char for storing character, string for storing group of characters, and bool for storing boolean values, that is true and false. Now in Dart there are 4 types of variable declaration. The first type is static declaration. In static declaration we write the data type followed by the variable name, let's call it v, and then a semicolon. We can store values to these variables by writing v is equal to and inside quotes reshove. Over here we have written string, that means the variable v can only store string values. Now let's try printing it. So to print I'll write print v followed by a semicolon, and now let's try running it. So it is showing reshove. We can merge these two statements together. So to merge we will write. Now again if I try running the program, we will get the same output, but over here it has changed from variable declaration to variable definition. The basic difference between variable declaration and variable definition is that in variable declaration we tell the compiler that the program will have a variable v of string type, but in variable definition we tell the compiler that the program will have a variable v of string type and reshove will be stored in it. After static declaration we have dynamic declaration. Over here dynamic refers to the data types, that is a variable can store values of different data types. We declare a dynamic variable by writing var v and then the values. So in the first variable I am storing a string, in the second variable I am storing an integer, and in the third variable I am storing a decimal. Okay, now I'll try printing them. So I'll write print v, then print v1, then print v2. Now if I click on run, I am getting the output as reshove 10 69.69. Over here var automatically changes to type of data stored in it, and memory to the variables are allocated during the compile time. And to check, if I select v over here in the documentation, I get string. If I select v1, I get integer, and if I select v2, I get double. Okay, so after static declaration and dynamic declaration, the third type of declaration is constant declaration. As the name suggests, variable declared constants cannot be changed. So to so to declare a constant value, we write const c is equal to 10. Now we can print the constant values. If I click on run, it will give me 10 as the output. And now if I try changing the values, if I write c is equal to c plus 1, and then if I print it, it is giving me an error. This says compilation failed. That is because I have tried to change the value of a constant variable over here. Okay, so after this, the last type of declaration is again dynamic declaration. Over here, dynamic refers to allocation of memory during runtime. For example, suppose we want to show the exact time when the program is executed. Then if we use var or string to store time, then the value will be the time at which the program was compiled and not the time when the program was executed. So in such cases we use dynamic variables. So to you create a dynamic variable, we write dynamic and then the variable v, and then we can add the value as and when required. Okay, so this was about variables. I hope everything was clear. So today we will learn about type conversion. So first let us try about converting string to integer. But before that, I would like to tell you one thing, that for writing comments we can use double slashes and write an inline comment, and we can also use slash followed by a star and then again star followed by space, and then over here we can write blocks of code, and then the final one is 3 slashes, and over here we can write the documentation. Okay, so back in the program, let's try converting string to integer. So to convert string to integer, we create a variable var1, and then I will write int dot parse, and inside this will be my string value. So suppose I enter 1. Now to check if one has an integer value, so we will write assert 1 equals digit 1. Assert is a built-in function to verify that the thing is as required or not. Okay, so now let's try adding some value to 1. If it is an integer, it will add without any problems. Over here I have written the wrong spelling. It will be assert. Now if I try to run the program, you can see 11 is the output. So over here you can see we have given 1 as a string input, then it has been converted to integer, and then I have added 10 to it and then printed. So 10 plus 1 is 11. Now we will try to convert integer to string. Integer to string. So for that I'll create a variable to store. I will write 1 is equal to 1, which is an integer, dot to string. Okay, now if I add some values, it should be concatenated to the end of the variable. So I will write 1 plus equal to reshuff. And now if I try printing it, the output is 1 reshuff. That means this integer 1 is converted to string and then reshuff is added at the end of the string 1. So this is how we convert an integer to string. Now to convert a decimal to string, we have two methods. First is the one similar to which we have seen just now, where 1 is equal to 3.1234, that is the decimal or double value, dot to string. And the other method is where 1d is equal to 3.1234 dot to string as fixed 2. So this basically means that the string will have only 2 decimal places. So let's check that, and to check that we use assert keyword and then we will write 1d is equal to, so as we have converted it to string, we will keep it inside quotes 3.12, and now then we will try printing. So we'll write 1d. Now if I click on run, the output should be 3.12. So you can see the output is 3.12. So this is how we convert an integer to string, string to integer, decimal to string, and also how to trim the decimal places. After type conversion, let's discuss about operators. So let's start with unary operators. So first I'll create a variable a and store 10 in it. Now to add some value to a, we can write a is equal to a plus 10. So what this will basically do is add 10 to a and then again store it inside the variable a. Let's check it by printing it. So the output is 20. Similarly, we can do for minus. The output is 0, and it will be same for multiplication as well as division. So we can reduce the length of the code if we want. So to reduce, we will write a is equal to a plus equal to 10. So this will also do the same purpose, that is to add 10 to a and then again store in it. So if I run this, the output should be 20. Similarly for minus, for multiplication and for division. Next type of operators is increment and decrement operator. So if I write print a plus plus and then again print a, the output will be 10 and 11. That means first this statement got executed, then the value of a was incremented by 1 and then a's value became 11 and it got printed here. But if I give the plus plus before a and then if I click on run, the output will be 11 and 11. That means before the execution of the statement, a got incremented by 1, as you can see in the console. Similarly for decrementing, we can use minus minus. Now if I click on run, the output will be 10 and 9. That means first the statement got executed, then the value was decremented. And now similarly, if I put minus minus before a and run it, then the value will get decremented first and then the statement will be executed. After unary operators, we have relational operator. So to learn about relational operator, I'll create two more variables where b is equal to 5, where c is equal to 15, and one more variable where d is equal to 10. So to check equality between any two variables, we write if a is equal to d, that means if a equals d, then print true. So the output is true. And now if I change this d to b and then click on run, there is no output because we don't have an else condition. So I'll write else print false. Now if I click on run, the output should be false. We will learn about if and else in details in the future tutorials. We will learn about if else in details later in this course. So after checking equality, there is an operator that checks for greater than equal to case. So if I write if a is greater than equal to b, then the output should be print true, else print false. Now if I run this, the output should be true. That is because the b has 5 stored in it and a has 10 stored in it. So as 10 is greater than 5, this condition is true. And now if I change to d, then again the output will be true because a has 10 stored in it and d has 10 stored in it. So a is equal to d. So the condition is true. And now if I change it to c, the output will be false because 15 is neither greater than nor equal to 10. Now after this, we have less than equal to. And if we run this, the output will be true. That means 10 is less than 15, which is true. And now if I change it to c itself, then also the output will be true. That is because 15 is equal to 15. Now after this, we also have only less than, that means 15, we have to check if 15 is less than 15. So the output should be false as 15 is equal to 15 but not less than 15. And now if I change it to d, the output will be true as 10 is less than 15. And if now I change it to greater than, then the output will again be false as 10 is not greater than 15. So this is how we use relational operators. Now another type of operators is logical operators. So there are three types of logical operators. The first one is logical and its symbol is and it checks and it returns true if both the conditions are true, otherwise it will return false. So let's check if d is greater than b. So if this is the condition, let's see what is the output. So the output is false. As you can see, d is less than c, that means 10 is less than c, that means this condition is false and this condition is true. And as I told you, and returns true only when both the conditions are true. As one of the condition is false, it returns false and the else statement gets executed. And now if I change it to greater than, that means now both the condition will be true, and if I try to run it, the output should be true, and as you can see the output is true. Now the next type of logical operator is OR operator, and the sign is this. Now OR operator returns true if any of the condition is true. So suppose, and if both the conditions is true, it will always give true as the result. So now if I run, the output will be true, and now even if I make one of the condition false, the output will still be true. That means if one of the condition is also true, the output is true. And now if I make both the conditions false, then the output will be false. And then the final type of operator is not. So over here if I write a is not equal to 10, then the output should be false. But as you know, the a is having 10 stored in it, so the output is false, because 10 is equal to 10 and not equal to 10. I hope you are understanding. So this was about operators. In this tutorial we will continue with operators. So the next type of operators are called null-aware operators. So for explaining this, I'll create a class num, and it will have a variable, or you can also call data members num, and it will have a value of 10. We will learn about class in greater detail later in this course. Now after that, over here I'll create a variable n, and to initialize a class we just write num, that is the class name, followed by parentheses. This is also called constructor. Then after that we'll create an integer variable no, and now we will check if n is not equal to null. Null stands for empty reference. Then no is equal to n dot num. That means to get the data member num from the object n, where n is an object of class num, and then we will print n. So now you can see when I print n, it is showing instance of num, and if I print no, it should show 10. So you can see 10 is the output. Now suppose we have not initialized this, and then if we try running, then it will show null. That means that no value is stored in n. So now instead of if else we can use the null-aware operator. So for that we will write no is equal to n question mark dot num, and try running it. The output is again null, but over here we don't have to write the if else. What it basically does is it checks that n is null or not. If n is not null, then it extracts the value from data member num and stores it inside no. So now let's try see the difference by initializing n. Over here I'll write num. Now if I run this, the output should be 10. So you can see the output is 10. Now we will see another type of null-aware operator. So now I'll change it back to null, and now along with this I'll add 2 question marks and give a 0, and now if I try running this, the output will be 0. This means that if n is null, then this will be the default value, and if I again write num, that means call the constructor and try running, then the value will be 10. And then the final type of null-aware operator is this. It is written by 2 question marks and then an equal to. So for that I'll remove this class, I don't need it anymore. I'll create a integer variable no and not initialize it, and now over here I'll write print no double question mark equal to 100. What this basically does is, if no is null, then it will store 100 in it. And now let's try running this. So you can see 100 is stored in no. Now the last type of operators are ternary operator. So I'll create a main method and I'll create an integer variable 5 and another integer variable 6. And now for the ternary operator I'll create a boolean value bool ans is equal to no greater than no1. So this is the condition, and if the condition is true we will set the value to true, else the value will be false. And now let's try printing the answer. Okay, sorry, the t will be small. So you can see the output is false, that means 5 is not greater than 6. This type of expression is called ternary operator, where 3 operators are used. Over here the operators are ans, no and n01. The functioning is, this is a condition, and if the condition is true then this part is executed, else this part is executed. So this was about operators. After operators, now we will move to conditional statements. So in Dart there are two types of conditional statements. One is if else and the other one is switch case. So to study about if else, I'll create an integer variable no and store 100 in it, and I want to print even if the number is even, otherwise I want to print odd. So for that I can use an if else. So inside the if, I'll try to divide it by 2 and get the remainder, and if the remainder is 0, that means it is completely divided by 2, that means it is an even number, so I should print even, otherwise I should print odd. Odd should be inside quotes. And now if I run the program, the answer should be even. And now if I change it to 1001, the output will be odd. And now if I want to have more than one condition, then over here I can write else if. So for that I'll write else if no divided by 3 and the remainder is equal to 0, then I will print divisible by 3, else print odd. So now if I change the number to 99, which is divisible by 3, you will see the output is divisible by 3. So if I run it, the answer is divisible by 3. So this is how we use if else for checking some conditions. You can add as many else if blocks you want, but if and else block can only be used once. After if else we have switch case. So in switch case we use the keyword switch, and then we need to pass a number or character that will be checked. So I'll be using number in this case, and then we will check the case 0, that means if no is equal to 0, then I want to print 0. 0 should be inside quotes followed by a break. Break brings the control outside of the switch case. Now after that I'll check for another case 100, that then print 100, and then again a break, and then finally we can have default, and there we can print not 0, not 100, and we don't need to give a break because we are as it is at the end of the switch case. So now let's try running this program. As the number is 99, the default case should be executed. So if I run this, the output is not 0, not 100, and now if I change it to 100, the output should be 100, and if I change it to 0, the output is 0. So this is how we use conditional statements in Dart. So the next thing that we will study in Dart is loops. So basically there are 5 types of loop. The first loop is for loop. So the syntax of for loop is very much same as in other programming languages. We have the keyword for, and then we create a variable where I is equal to 0, that is initializing a variable, then setting the range I is less than 10, and then increment or decrement, and then inside this we write the code that we want to execute. So for right now I will be printing programming knowledge, and now if I click on run, programming knowledge should be printed 10 times. So you can see it has been printed 10 times. So this is how we use for loop. Another possible way to use for loop is setting this value to 10 and checking that I is greater than 0, and instead of incrementing, decrementing the operators. And now if I run this code, the output will be exactly same. So these are the two methods in which we can use for loop. The next type of loop is called for in loop. So I'll just remove this. So for in loop is basically used in collections. We will study about collections later in this course, but for now I'll just create a list and store 1, 2, 3 in it. List is a type of collection that stores more than one values under the same name. And now to run, I'll write for where x, where x is a variable that I have created in no. That means x will have 1, 2, 3 every time the loop runs. So now if I print x, 1, 2, 3 should be printed. So you can see the output is 1, 2, 3. Now the next type of loop is for each loop. For each loop is also used on collections. So just for example, I'll write no, that is the variable that we have created, dot for each, that is a method, and inside that it returns n, that is each value inside the no list, and then it should perform some tasks. So to write which task to perform, we first give an equal to, then a right arrow, and then we write the statement print n in this case. So now if I click on run, 1 2 3 should again be the output. Now suppose we want to call another function, so for that I'll write void print num. It takes a value num and then prints it to the console. So now instead of this print statement, I'll replace it with my method name, that is print num, and it takes a value num which is nothing else than n. So now if I try to run this, I'll get the same output. Now the next type of loop is while loop. So for that I don't need this function. Now I'll create a variable, integer type variable num, and initialize it to 5. And now I want to run a loop while num is greater than 0. So to run a while loop, the keyword is while. And now over here I'll just simply print the number and then decrement the number by 1. And now if I run the loop, I'll get the output 5 4 3 2 1. So this is how we use a while loop. Now the next type of loop is do while loop. So for do while, we first write do, and then inside that the code that every time the condition is true should be executed. So I'll just print the number, then num minus minus, and then after do we have while num greater than 0. And now if we run the code, we will get the same output. Now the benefit of do while over while is that even if the condition is true, even if the condition is false, the loop gets executed once. Suppose the condition is, suppose the number is -1, that is already less than 0. So now if I run, the loop will get at least executed once. So the output is -1. But if we use while instead of do while, this will not get executed. Now if I click on run, the console will be empty. So this is the difference between while and do while. Now another thing that is important while studying loops is break and continue. We have seen break in switch cases, and now we will see that in a more elaborate way. The basic concept of break is that wherever break statement is executed, the control comes out of the loop. So suppose I have number 10 and I want to print only till 5, but my while loop has the condition till checks till 0. So what I'll basically do is I'll check if num is equal to 5, then break, and the print statement will also be there, and the decrement statement also. So now if I click on run, it should only print till 6, I guess. Yes. So you can see the output only till 6 is printed, because as soon as num value became 5, this condition became true and break was executed. So as soon as break was executed, it came out of the loop. So that was about loops. In this tutorial, we are going to discuss about collections in Dart. There are basically 3 built-in collections that ships with Dart. One of them is list. List is very similar to arrays that we have in most of the other programming languages. We can define a list by writing the keyword list and then the name that we want to give to the list and a pair of square brackets. So in this manner, we have created a variable of list which has a name and it has been initialized, and it has no values in it. And suppose if I want to initialize with certain values inside it, then I can simply write them inside the square brackets, and to add more than one value we can just separate them by a comma. So over here I have a list name which has two values stored in it, Rishabh and Ram. So list also follows the basic indexing concept that we have in most of the programming languages except Pascal, Fortran, etc. That is, the indexing starts at 0. That means this Rishabh is stored at an index 0 and Ramesh is stored at index 1. So to print the values at a certain index, we just need to write it inside the print statement and followed with a square brackets, and inside square brackets we need to write the index. And now if I click on run, Rishabh should be printed. And now if I change the index from 0 to 1, Ramesh should be printed. And over here I can also change this list to var, and it should not give us any error. This is because Dart with the help of type inference automatically converts this variable name to a type or to a list type which has strings value stored in it. Now we can have values of more than one data type stored in the list. So to do so, if I write 100, which is an integer, and if I also try to add a double value, then this will work and it will not give us any error. So if I click on run, 100 should be the output. Now suppose I want to loop through each of the values, then the most easiest way is to use a for each loop. So for that I'll write var I in name, and then inside this I'll just print I, and then I should be able to see all the values that I have inside the list. And now if I want, I can also change the values at a certain index in the list. So if I want to change the value at index 1 in the list name, then I can just simply change it to Suresh, and this should work. And it is not necessary to change a string value to another string value only. We can give it a integer value also. And now if I click on run, 1 2 3 should be displayed instead of Suresh. So it is working fine. And now suppose we want to have a list that only stores string, then what we can do is we can change this var to list, and after that inside angular brackets I'll define the data type. That means only string values should be there. So you can see the red line below this integer and float values. It is basically there because we have defined the list as a string values container list, and it cannot store integer and double. So if I remove this, then it will not be a problem. Now if I click on run, Rishabh and Ramesh should be printed. Now let me change it back to var, and I'll remove this comment, and then I want to change the value at index 1 from Ramesh to 1 2 3, and then if I click on run, then it is changing. Okay, and now suppose I don't want to change the value at runtime. So what I can basically do is I can put a const over here which makes the values stored inside the variable name as a constant. So now you can see over here I am declaring the variable name as a constant, and after that I am trying to change a value. So if I run this, it should give me an error. So over here you can see uncaught error, unsupported operation, indexed set. And now if I comment this again and try to run this, then this should not be an error. Now after that, suppose I want to copy this list to another variable. So for that I'll create a new variable n, and I'll just simply write name, and over here in the loop I'll change this name to n. and now if I click on run, the output will be same. Okay, but now if I change the value of name, means any value of the list name, then the values in list n will also change. Okay, so it is giving me an error because I have a const over here, so I'll just remove the const for now for the explanation purpose. So now if I click on run, it is still giving me an error. It is because I have missed a semicolon over here. So now if I give the semicolon and run this again, so over here you can see that if we change the values stored in the variable name, then the values stored in variable n is also changing. So basically over here it doesn't copy the set of values, but both the list variables point at the same location, that is the location of the data in the memory. So to avoid this, we have a special function that is prefabricated in Dart known as spread operator. JavaScript developers might be familiar with this. So over here what we basically do is we surround the variable name with square brackets, and before writing the variable name we just simply give 3 simple dots. And now after assigning, if we change the value of the previous list or the original list, then it will not be reflected in the new list. So now if I click on run, the output should be Rishabh and Ramesh. So this is how we get the two different copies of a list. In the last tutorial we discussed about lists, and in this tutorial we are going to discuss about another collection that is called set. So suppose I want to define a set of elements, so I'll write elements, and to initialize a set we give a pair of curly braces, and inside suppose I have two values, for instance hydrogen and oxygen. Okay, so now over here I have defined a set elements that has two values, hydrogen and oxygen, and to iterate through each value we can simply use the for each loop. So for that we write for var x in halogens, then simply for now let's print the value. Okay, and now if I run this, hydrogen and oxygen should be printed in the screen. Okay, my mistake, instead of elements I have written halogens over here. So now if I run this, hydrogen and oxygen should be printed. Okay, so another feature of set is that if we have duplicate values, then it gets removed automatically. So for instance, suppose I add another hydrogen. Okay, and now if I try to run this, we will get a single hydrogen printed on the console. Okay, so this is a feature of set that we use while programming in Flutter. Okay, so the next thing about set is that to initialize a set, if we write something like this, which is correct according to the basic convention. Okay, now if I try printing its runtime type, so first of all, to print the runtime type we write element dot runtime type and a semicolon over here. And now if I run this, so it is giving me an error because an s is missing right over here. And now if I run this, the output is hash map, but our task was, or our assumption was, that this will initialize a set. So this is a common mistake that everyone does. Okay, so the curly braces stand for a hash map, and if you want to initialize a set, then we can just add a data type over here, or the data type of the values which we are going to store. And now if I run this, this should change from hash map to hash set. Okay, and yet another method is we can write, instead of var we write a set over here. Okay, now if I run this, the output will be again hash set. Okay, and I can also predefine the data type that will be stored in that set by writing like this. And now if I run this, it again says hash set, but instead of dynamic, now it has string over here, which means it can only store string values. Okay, so moving on, this was about set. The next thing that we are going to discuss is map, that is yet another collection provided by Dart, and it is very much similar to dictionaries in Python and hash map in Java. And for different languages there is also some reference to this type of collection. Okay, so you understand that how much important this map collection is. Okay, so to create a map, we write, for suppose say I create a map student, okay, that has a key value pair. Okay, so the key is name and the value is my name. Okay, then a comma, then the another value, that is another key, that is age, and the value is 20. So mark over here, I can store different data types as my key and as my value. Let's say the third value is email. Okay, and the answer is my email. Okay, so now over here I have a student map that has three key value pair. The key is name, the value is Rishabh, key is age, the value corresponding to that is 20, the key is email and the value corresponding to it is my email. Okay, and now suppose I want to print a particular value, so that can be done using the key. Okay, so suppose if I want to print my name, so inside print I'll first write the map name and then inside square brackets I'll write the key name. Mark over here, I have my key as a string, so the key over here is also a string. Okay, and now if I run this, Rishabh should be the output. Okay, so this was about map, and over here we finished the collections. Now moving forward, the next thing that we are going to discuss is functions, or you can also call them methods if they are inside a class. So over here, this void main is itself a method, itself a function, the most important function in any Dart program. This is where the compiler will start executing the code from. Okay, so now suppose I create another function, a very basic function called sum. Okay, I am writing dynamic before that, that defines the return type, and dynamic stands for the value will be assigned, the data type will be assigned during runtime. Okay, so the return type will be dependent on the inputs that we give. Okay, so if I write var n1 comma var n2, okay, now simply I just return their sum. So I write n1 plus n2, and now over here I call this method, and since it is returning some values, so I need to store it in a variable, or a shorthand of a shorthand method will be I directly surround it with a print statement so that the return value directly gets printed. And then sum, I'll pass two values, 1 comma 2, and now if I run this, 3 should be the output. Okay, and similarly, as I have dynamic over here, it is not confined to integer only, I can also pass a decimal value which will be considered as float over here, and I get a float output, and I can also pass a string over here. So suppose I pass two strings, Shav and Kumar, and if I run this, Rishabh Kumar will be the output. That means string concatenation has taken place. Okay, now the another feature about functions in Dart is that if we have a single line function, then instead of writing it like this, we can use the shorthand method that Dart provides, that is giving an equal to sign, then a right angle sign, and then just writing the operation that we want to provide, and in this case it is n1 plus n2, and we don't need to write a return statement over here. And now if I run this, the output will be the same. Okay, and let's again check it with an integer. If I write 1 comma 2, sorry, now let's run this, and you can see 3 is the output. So this type of function is common in all types of programming language, and this type of function is called positional functions. That means the first parameter will be stored in the first variable defined inside the parentheses, and the second parameter will be stored in the second variable decided in the parentheses. Okay, and the next type of arguments are called named arguments, where we don't need to worry about the order. Okay, so to make it a named argument, I'll just put curly braces in between the parentheses and the variable names. Okay, and now I can pass any value as per my choice. Okay, so I want to pass the n1 value, so I'll just write the key name, give a colon and the value, comma. Similarly for the other parameter, I'll write n2, that is the key name, and a value. Okay, now similarly if I run this, the output will be 3 again. Okay, and now the basic flexibility that it provides over here is that I can change the order in which I want my value to pass. Okay, so suppose I want to pass n2 as Rishabh and n1 as Kumar. So now my output will be Kumar Rishabh. Okay, but if we would have gone by the positional method, then Rishabh Kumar should have been printed, but because we are using named arguments, we are getting this flexibility to change the order of parameters that we give as an input to any method. Okay, in this video we are going to discuss about class and objects in Dart. Okay, so if you don't know what is class and object, you can refer to this website. It has explained beautifully. Over here you can see we have a class car. Okay, and then these objects are derived from this class. Okay, so generally till now whatever we have done, like whenever we wanted to store some value, we created a variable, and then that variable generally had some primitive data type like string, integer, and more like that. Okay, but suppose if I want to have a collection of these primitive data types and refer to them as a single object, then we use this class and objects. Okay, so you can read more about this. Okay, so back in our Dart pad, to create a class we have a keyword class. Okay, and then we write the class name. Over here I am writing point. That is a very common problem that we see. Okay, means a common competitive coding question. Okay, so I'll have two variables inside this, int x and int y. Okay, both are primitive data type, and any variable that is declared inside a class is called as data members. Okay, so now it is recommended that whenever we create a class and have some data members, then we should initialize it. Okay, and to initialize we have a special function inside a class called constructor, which is used for initializing all the data members inside a class. Okay, so now this constructor doesn't have any return type, and it has the same name as we have of the class. Okay, so over here the class name is point, then the constructor name will also be point. Okay, then we have created this method. Now inside this method what I am going to do is I am gonna initialize my data members. Okay, so for that I'll write x is equal to 0 and y is equal to 0. Okay, so this is done. Now to create a object of this class, over here I'll simply write the class name and then p, means that is the object name, which is very similar to how we created any other variable like int x. So that means we have created a variable x of type int. Okay, and over here if we give var, that means that was also correct, and so is the case over here. Even if we write var over here, this will also work. This is absolutely fine, but for the time being I am gonna use point. Okay, so that it is clearer to understand. Okay, so now to access any data members we simply write print p dot x. Okay, and let's try printing it. So 0 should be printed. Okay, so you can see we got an error over here, and the error is because we have just created the object but we have not initialized it. Okay, so to initialize any object we need to write the class name and then parenthesis, which is basically calling this constructor. Okay, that means as soon as this point p will be created, then this point method will be called, which is nothing but our constructor. So then our values will be initialized and the error will be not there. So you can see the error is also null error. That means the value is not assigned some proper quantity, like this x and y are null, they don't have any value stored in them, then that's why the compiler is not able to print the values. Okay, so let's try running this now. So now you can see the output is 0 for x, as we have stored 0 in x. Okay, so now if I change it to 10, then the output should be 10. And you can see that. Okay, so now I'll remove this function for now. We don't need function right now. Okay, so this is one type of constructor. Now we can have some parameters assigned also, like suppose I am giving it a value int a. Okay, and now over here when I call this constructor, now I need to pass this value a. Okay, so let's say I pass 200. Okay, so now over here what will happen, that I am assigning the received value at a to this variable x. So now if I print x, I should be able to see the value that I have sent from here. So let's see, and you can see 200 is being printed. Similarly you can try for print p dot y. Now if I run this, I should be able to see 200 and 0. Okay, now the next thing that we are going to see is like suppose I have the data members as x and y, and the parameters I am taking is also x and y. Okay, so like for first I need to give here another parameter, because over here I am expecting two parameters. So now if I want to assign this x value to this x, conventionally I should write x is equal to x, and same goes for y, I should write y is equal to y. So now at this point the compiler will be confused as to which x refers to which type of data, like is this x the data member or the positional argument that we have over here, and the same for this x, that whether it is the positional argument that we get over here or the data members. Okay, so in such scenarios we have a special keyword called this. Okay, so if I write this dot x and this dot y, so that means if it is written this dot x, that means I am referring to the data member of this class. Okay, so if I write this inside this point class, that means my this is referring to this class, and this has a variable y, has a data member x, which is this one. So in this data member, this positional argument will be stored. Okay, so now let's try removing this and see what is the error. And you can see it is showing null, that means no value is assigned, because over here these both are referred as the positional arguments. Okay, so if I add this dot y, then the error should be gone. Okay, I should be able to see 200 and 100. Okay, so you can see that. So this is when this keyword comes to play. Okay, so now this is one method to create a constructor. There is a simpler method that Dart provides. Okay, I'll remove this and I'll simply write point. Okay, and then inside this dot x comma this dot y, and then a semicolon. Okay, so this means that when we call the constructor, the value that we store over here will be stored in the parameter, in the named argument that we have over here, and which is eventually a data member. So the value received over here will be directly saved in this data member. Okay, so now if I run this, we will not see any error, and the answer will also be the same, but you can see the lines of code has reduced and it is a much more simpler way. Okay, so this is it. Now after that, the next thing that we have in a class is a function. Okay, so a class generally comprises of three things: data members, constructor, and some functions. And the functions which are inside a class are called member functions. And sometimes we also have a destructor. Okay, so if you don't know about a destructor, then as we have constructor which is called at the start as soon as the object is initialized, destructor is called as soon as the execution of that object ends. Okay, so we are not gonna discuss about the destructor because that is not used a lot, but if you want to learn, you can go to the official documentation of Dart. Okay, so now we are going to create a member function. Okay, so I'll first simply create a simple member function that will simply print some data. Okay, and it will not return anything, so the return type is void, and the method name is print data. And since it is a one-liner function, I'll write it like this: print, and then I'll use string interpolation. Okay, and y. So now if I run this, I should be able to see 100 plus 200, 200 plus 100, I'm sorry. Okay, so you can see the output is not as we expected, and that is because over here I have not called the method. That is my mistake. Okay, so to call any member function, we first need to write the object name, a dot, and then that member function. Okay, so now let's try running this, and then we should be able to get the output. Okay, and you can see the first two print statements give these two output, and the last is this statement which is executing this function, and over here we have this print statement x plus y, so we are getting the value of x plus the value of y. Okay, so this were the basics about class and objects. So in this tutorial we are going to continue our discussion on class and objects in Dart. Okay, so now we are going to discuss about named constructors. Okay, so sometimes we need to have more than one constructor, such as one which takes two input values and the other one which takes a map. Okay, so that may vary according to your requirement. Okay, so in those places, what we do in any other programming language was to create another constructor with the same name, and over here the parameter will vary. Okay, so that was the normal case that we had in Java, C or C++. Okay, but in Dart this will give us an error. Okay, so the way to have more than one constructor in a same class in Dart is by using the named constructor. Okay, that means the constructor will have an additional name to it. Okay, so to create a named constructor, we first write our class name. Okay, and then the additional name, so let's say from map. Okay, and as the name suggests, that this will take a map of type string int, and I'll call it map, and then I'll store the value in this map to my data members. Okay, so for that I'll write this dot x is equal to map, and map will have a x value. Okay, this dot y, and then map will have a y value. Okay, so this is done. Now let's try creating a point object using this constructor. Okay, so for that, over here I'll first instantiate an object point p1, and then to call this named constructor we write point dot from map. Okay, and then over here, as you can see over here, we are expecting a map, so we need to pass a map. Okay, so for that I'll open curly braces, and then the first value is x, and let's say 10, and then the next value is y, and I'll pass 20. Okay, then I'll close this bracket over here. Now over here you can see the type has been mentioned, so it would be better if we mention the type over here also. This is referred as a good practice. Okay, so string int. Okay, that means in this map the key will always be of string type and the value will always be of integer type. Any other data type will give us an error. Okay, so now let's try calling this function on this p1 object. Okay, so for that I'll write p1 dot print data. So now let's try running this, and we should get 10 plus 20 as the output, and you can see that. So this is how we have more than one constructor in the same class by using the named constructor. Okay, so now over here you can see this is how we create a named constructor, but this is not the best way. Actually, there is another way, and that is called initializer list. Okay, so for that I'll remove this from here. Okay, and let's see how we use an initializer list. Okay, so suppose my named constructor is same dot from map. Okay, and it takes a map of type string and int, and I call it map. Okay, now instead of giving curly braces, what I am going to do is I'll give a colon. Okay, and then I'll initialize the value. So I'll write x is equal to map x. Okay, and y is equal to map y. Okay, and then over here only we can call this print data method. Okay, so let's see what happens. Print data. Okay, so this means this method will be called after the value is stored. Okay, so let's try running this. I'll just remove this print data from here. We should get the same output. Let's see. And you can see we get the same output. So over here you can see our lines of code are less, and the work is also optimized. That means before the code inside this constructor starts running, our data members are initialized. Okay, so this is where initializer list comes to play. Okay, and we don't use initializer list just to initialize, but for other cases also, like assert x greater than 0. Okay, so that means it will check if x value is greater than 0, and if it is not, then this constructor will not run. Okay, so assert is a special keyword that we have in Dart. Okay, and the code will not pass from here until this condition is true. Okay, if this condition is false, then the execution will stop over here. Okay, so this is done. Yes, so now let's try running this. I hope there are no errors. Okay, and you can see there is an error. Okay, so let's see what has happened. Okay, so the error over here is that x and y are not getting initialized. Okay, so instead of writing it over here, I'll write it. I'll cut it from here, remove this. Okay, and over here I'll write the same thing. Okay, now let's try running this, and I think the error should be gone by now. And the error still exists because we are calling this, and this is not valid. So now let's run this again. Okay, so now you can see we get the output. Now the next thing that we are going to discuss in class is getters and setters. We can use the same type of getters and setters that we use in any other object-oriented programming language. Along with that, there is another procedure that Dart provides. Okay, so to get a value, we simply write the return type of the value, and then the keyword get, and then the name pointx. Okay, so suppose if I call pointx, I want the value stored in this data member. Okay, so then simply I'll write this dot x. Okay, so that means over here return keyword is applied implicitly. Okay, so now let's try running this. So I'll write print p dot pointx. Okay, so as I told in the previous video, we call all the methods inside the class using the object of that class. Okay, so now let's try running this, and 200 should be printed below this, and you can see that. Okay, similarly we can write for y int get point y. Okay, and then this returns this dot y. Now similarly over here I'll print this print p dot get y. Sorry, p dot point y. Now let's run this and I should get 100 over here, and you can see that now this getter is not only used for getting the data members, we can use return customized answers also. Okay, so suppose if I want to return a map of type string and int, and I'll call it get map. Okay, then this should return a map of type string and int. Okay, and the values will be x, and that will have the value stored in the data member x. Okay, and then it will have a value y. Okay, and that will return the value stored in the data member y. Okay, then I'll close this over here, and as I said, the return keyword is applied in these both implicitly. Okay, so then again I'll call this method point p dot get map. Okay, and now let's try running this. Okay, so it is giving us an error, and that is because instead of print over here I have written point. So now let's try running this, and there we get the result. It returns a map where x has value 200 stored in it and y has a value 100 stored in it. That is same as we have passed in our constructor. Okay, so this is how we use the getters in Dart. Okay, now talking about setters. For setters also there's a different method that is provided by this Dart. So we simply write set, that is a keyword in Dart, and then point x. Okay, point capital X. Okay, so now let's not give the same name. I'll write set x. Okay, and then it expects an integer value. I'll call it x, and then as we know how to differentiate, this dot x refers to the data member and this refers to the parameter that we get over here. Okay, so now let's try calling this. I'll call p dot set x. Okay, and then it returns expects a value. I'll give 500 to it. Okay, and then simply p dot print data. Okay, now let's try running this. Okay, so over here you can see we get an error. So the error was, instead of passing it as a parameter, I pass it with an equal to sign. Okay, so now let's try running this, and you can see instead of 200 the value has now changed to 500. Similarly we can set y for the y parameter, and then similarly we can take a map and then map it to our data members like we did in the named constructor part. Okay, so this was about getters and setters, and by this we complete the basics of class and objects in Dart. Okay, so the next thing that I want to discuss is about enums. Okay, so enum is a special type of class that represents fixed number of constant values. Okay, so to create an enum, okay, so now suppose we have a payment status. Okay, like the payment status will have 3 values, and those 3 need to be fixed values. Okay, so in those cases we use an enum. Okay, so for enum we write the keyword enum, and then let's say payment status. That is the example scenario that we have taken, payment status. Okay, and then this has 3 values. First one is not paid, then OTP sent, and then paid. Okay, so this can be the 3 members. I'll give a semicolon over here, comma over here. Okay, I think we don't need a semicolon over here. Yes, we don't need it. So we have an enum over here that has 3 values: not paid, OTP sent, and paid. Okay, so over here we can create a object of this enum. Okay, so for that I'll write final status, and to store any value from this enum we first write the enum name, that is payment status dot not sent, not paid. Okay, so now we have a status which will have a data type of payment status, and it has a value. You can see enum payment status. If I click on this also, we will get the same thing, that is payment status. Okay, so the status right now is not paid. Now to check, so this is actually used widely when we use a switch case. Okay, so in switch case I have a status. Okay, and then I'm sorry, in switch case we have a status, and then over here the first case is case payment status dot not paid, and if that is true, then we want to do something. And then similarly for the other two statuses. Okay, so now you might be thinking that why do we use enum even when we can simply write it, use it as a string or as an integer. Okay, so enum is used for standardizing the values. Okay, so now suppose over here if you have the state, शांत हो जाइए. Okay, so now suppose over here the status is not paid. Okay, and in the switch case we are checking switch and then case, and the case is not paid. Okay, so you can see this is a common mistake that we can do. Like over here we have a capital P, over here we have a small p, and using enum we can avoid all these types of mistake also. So that is another benefit of using enum. So in this video we are going to discuss about error handling in Dart, and you might be thinking why we are using this editor instead of the Dartpad, and the reason is that in Dartpad it automatically handles the exception. Okay, and as we are discussing about error handling, so we need to see the errors. Okay, not all the errors but maximum errors in the Dartpad is handled by itself. Okay, so the concept of error handling is same as in any other object oriented programming language. Okay, we have a try, and then we have a catch. Okay, and then this catch block takes an exception. Okay, and if you don't know what is an exception, so that is a technical term used for errors. Okay, so in your program if there is an error, then it is referred to an exception. Okay, so and in the catch block we deal with the exception. Okay, so now let's try creating an error. Okay, and without this try and catch block. So I'll use the most popular example for errors, for creating errors, that is division by 0. Okay, so I'll create a variable a 10, sorry it should be 10, and then another variable b, that is 0, and then in variable c I'll store the quotient, so a by b. Okay, and then I'll print c. So now let's try running this and see what is the answer. And you can see we are getting infinity as the answer. Okay, so that is because whenever we divide by 0 in Dart, it automatically gets converted to a double value. Okay, and in the double data type in Dart we have a certain value for infinity. So as this will give an output infinity, so it is automatically converted into double, and the infinity value is assigned to this variable c. That is why we are getting infinity as the output. Okay, so to prevent from the changing of data types, we need to add a tilde symbol over here. So now let's try running this again. Okay, and now since it is not being converted, we should get an error. Okay, and you can see we are getting an error, and as I told, error is referred as exception. So there is an unhandled exception, and that is integer division 0 exception. Okay, that means it is very much understanding that we have divided by 0, and that is why we are getting this exception. Okay, but now suppose this exception is in an app and the user sees this error message, so he might not be able to understand what this means. Okay, so at that places what we do is we surround them with a try and catch block. Okay, so over here a try, and every try block needs to be followed by a catch block. Okay, and then it takes an e, that is the exception, and that will be an object of this exception. Okay, and then instead of printing these things, I'll simply print division by 0 is not possible. Okay, and now let's try running this again. And you can see that the catch block has been executed and it is printing division by 0 is not possible. Okay, so this is what happens normally in try and catch block. We keep the code where we expect to find some error inside the try block. Okay, and if some error is found, then the execution is terminated then and there, and the catch block is executed instead. Okay, so this is the use of try and catch block, and this is how we generally use try and catch block in most of the programming languages. Okay, so now in Dart there is another thing that it provides us. Okay, and that is for specific exception handling. That means if it is a division by 0 exception, then we will handle it differently, otherwise we will handle it differently. Okay, so for that what I'll write over here is on. Okay, so on is a keyword in Dart, and then the exception name integer division by 0 exception. Okay, so if this is the case, that means integer division by 0 exception is the case, then this statement will be printed. So let's try running this, and you can see division by 0 is not possible, that is inside our this on block. Okay, now along with this, let's try and check if we can have another catch block or not. Okay, so now inside this I'll simply print another catch block. Okay, and let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so you can see only the on block is being printed and not the catch block. Means if the exception is of this type, then only this block will be executed and not the catch block. And if the exception is not of this type, then only catch block will be executed. Okay, so now let's create another exception. I'll comment this out for now, and I'll create a list, let's say s is equal to 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4, and I'll try to print the value out of index. Okay, so that means s4, where the list has index only till 3, 0 1 2 and 3. So let's try executing this and see. And now you can see it is giving me some different type of errors, which is not actually an error, but it is an warning, and that is because over here I have forgot to give the data type. Now let's try running this again, and you can see the error has been created over here, and since it was not of this type, so this block is not executed. Instead the catch block is executed. Okay, so this is how we handle error specifically, means handle error for specific exception in a specific way. Okay, and suppose if we want to get an object over here also, so after this what we need to do is simply write catch e. Okay, so that means when this is the exception, then the exception will be catched over here, and then inside this we can do whatever we want to do with this e block. Okay, so this was about try, catch, and this is specific error handling. Now the next thing that we generally discuss in error handling is a finally block. Okay, so that means whether the try block is executed completely, or if there is some exception and a catch block is executed, no matter what is the case, after this whole part is over, finally block will always be executed. Okay, so let's see, print always executed. Okay, and now let's try running this, and you can see the catch block has been printed, means the statement inside the catch block has been printed, and the finally block has also been executed. Okay, so this was the case when there is an error. Now let's see if there is not an error. Okay, then as I said, this try block should be executed, and then the finally block, because that is always executed. Okay, so this was about finally block. Okay, so the last thing about exception that we need to discuss is creating a custom exception. Okay, so for that I'll create a custom exception class. Okay, since we are studying an object oriented programming languages, most of our working will be done via class. Okay, so I'll create a class age exception, okay, which will throw an error when the age is below 0, which is not technically possible. So class age exception implements. Okay, so this is the way of inheriting another class properties, okay, or a abstract class to be more specific. Implements exception. Okay, so we have an exception class already inside that. Okay, now inside this all we need to do is define a method string errmsg, or you can name it as and how you like. Okay, so what it basically does is, by implementing this exception, we are basically able to throw this type of exception. Okay, and whatever we do inside this doesn't matter with the throwing of exception. Okay, this is our custom choice what we want to do with it. Okay, so over here this will simply return age cannot be 0, age cannot be less than 0. Okay, so now over here let's see, I'll remove this thing from here, and now over here I'll create a variable a where vra is equal to -10. Okay, so that means if a stands for age, so I'll check if a is less than 0, then I want to call this exception. Okay, so to call this exception there is another keyword throw, which creates an exception and throws it to the catch block if it has any, or to the user if we don't surround it with a try and catch block. So throw, and then we write age exception. Okay, so now let's see what happens. And you can see we got an exception, the exception was thrown over here, that's why the catch block got executed, and the finally always gets executed. So in this video we are going to discuss about asynchronous operations in Dart. Okay, so the question that arises is, why asynchronous operations? So the answer to that would be, asynchronous operations let your program keep running while waiting for another operation to finish. Okay, so let's say for example we want to store data in our server. So this type of operation doesn't execute instantly but might take some time depending upon the internet speed or size of data, etc. So if we don't use asynchronous operation, user will have to wait until our program is interacting with the server, which will create a bad user experience. So to prevent that, we use asynchronous operations. And for this purpose, Dart provides us 3 special keywords to use. They are future, async, and await. So first we are going to discuss about future. Okay, so a future represents the result of an asynchronous operation and can have 2 states only, either uncompleted state or completed state. So how this works is, when we call an asynchronous function, it returns a uncompleted future. and then future is waiting for the function's asynchronous operation to finish or throw an error, and soon as it finishes or throws error, the future state changes from uncompleted to completed. Okay, so let's take an example, and the keyword future, we have capital F in it. Okay, so let's say we have a future method, future function, we call it fetch user data. And what it basically does is return future dot delayed. Okay, so this means that using this delayed method we can delay the process for some times. That is equivalent to sleep in multi-threading in Java or in any other common programming language. I mean object oriented programming language. Okay, so then we have another class called duration, and it takes all the time parameters, that is seconds, minutes, hours, days. Okay, so for now, suppose we assume that our program will take 2 seconds to interact with the server. So I'll give it a seconds, and that is 2. That means this will wait for 2 seconds and then start executing. Okay, and we are doing this because we have assumed 2 seconds to be the time of our program to be interacting with the server. Okay, so after this we have an unnamed function which contains the code that will be executed after this delay of duration 2 seconds, and simply I want to print data. Okay, so this is our function. Now we can also specify the return type of the future. Okay, now over here in this fetch user data I have a return keyword, but it is not actually returning any data, it is simply printing the word data. That means I am not returning anything, and if I am not returning anything, then we all know the keyword, which is void, which means this function will not return any data. Now I'll comment this out for now. Okay, now after that I'll call this method fetch user data, and after that I can say have a print statement fetching user data. Okay, so now let's try running this. Okay, so now you can see we have fetching user data first and then data, but actually according to the convention we have first called fetch user data, which is this method, so this should be printed first. So that means our delay function is working fine, and that is how the asynchronous functions work. That means over here if there is a delay of 2 seconds, it will not wait for 2 seconds to execute the rest of the code. It will directly start executing the rest of the code, and as soon as this finishes, the future states become completed and it hardly affects the rest of the execution of the program. So then this function is called an asynchronous function. Okay, that means our program is still running and not caring about the completion of this function, means the completion of execution of this function. Okay, so this is how we use futures. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to discuss is async and await. So these keywords provide a declarative way to define a async function and use their result. Okay, so let's say this function remains same, and instead of printing data, now it actually returns something, and which is eventually a string. Okay, so means after 2 seconds data will be returned. Okay, and now if it is returning string, I need to change this to string. Okay, and now after that over here I'll create another method which is string, and I'll call it user message. Okay, anything that we like. And then what it basically does is var data is equal to fetch user data, means we are calling this method. Okay, and then I am simply printing this, simply returning a string, because we have a string return type here, return data. And now in our main method, all we do is we remove all these thing and we write print user msg. Okay, now over here you can see it is giving us an error, so all we can do is surround it inside quotes and do string interpolation. Okay, so now Dart will infer that it is a string. So now let's try running this and see what is the output. Okay, so as according to the convention, the output should be data, but instead of that we are getting a future of string. That means, as I earlier said, if we execute a future, it returns a future, and that is in uncompleted state, and it is expecting to be completed or thrown error. Okay, so now over here you can see what basically happened was that this function was executed, and as this is a asynchronous operation, it didn't wait for this function to finish and returned the data. And since this was not yet finished, it returned the incomplete state of future, and that is why we are getting such type of output. Okay, so this is what we call a uncompleted future. Okay, and a completed future has a proper accurate value. Okay, so I hope you are understanding what I am trying to say. And now to prevent such type of error, what we need to do is we will use the async and await keyword. Okay, so what await keyword basically does is that it will wait for this function to execute, or basically it will wait for this function's future to be of completed state. Okay, and then this await function is giving an error over here, and that is because await function never goes without async function. Okay, async and await always go together. Okay, if we write await and don't write async, it will give us an error. However, vice versa will not give an error, and that is because async is just allowing that function to use await, and then if we don't use await, then that is not a problem. But if we use await and we have not allowed that function to use await, then that thing will give us a problem. Okay, I hope you are understanding these things. Now, as you can see, this is now a asynchronous function, and over here also you have seen a asynchronous function. But the difference between these two asynchronous functions were this asynchronous function returns a future, while this asynchronous function is returning a string, and that is why we are getting an error over here, because asynchronous functions always return a future. Okay, so instead of string, this will now be future string. So now it is a future string, and since it also will now return over here a uncompleted state of future, and we want a completed state of future, that means we want some actual result, we will use await over here also. And now since this is using await, we need to give async over here. Keep in mind, async is always after the ending parentheses and before the opening curly braces. Okay, so now let's try running this program, and now instead of getting this instance, we should be able to see this data being printed. So let's see. and you can see as soon as the execution is completed, it waits for 2 seconds and then data is being printed. So it is waiting for 2 seconds because over here we have used await, which is making the program stop for 2 seconds until this has a completed state of future, and the same goes over here. So this were all the basics about future, async and await. Okay, so I hope everything was clear. Thank you.